Empty-handed, I entered the world. Barefoot, I leave it. My coming, my going, two simple happenings that got entangled. That is the poem by Zen Master Kozan. Can you hear me? You were having a little trouble earlier.
Yes, we can hear you now.
So that poem comes from a tradition of poems. They're often called death poems. So this was, as the story goes, written right before he died, written actually right in front of his students. And he wrote this poem and put his pen down and then died, they say, sitting upright. It's a very Zen story. But I wanted to start with this poem and start to, in our practice together, turn towards this question of contemplating death and contemplating our mortality and contemplating ceaseless change, impermanence. For the last few weeks, we've been taking up the question of acceptance. What does it mean to accept our circumstances? And what can we do from this place of acceptance? And with the subject of death, this is sort of like the ultimate test, if you will. It's not a test, but the ultimate invitation of acceptance. Death is a difficult topic for most of us. It conjures up all sorts of thoughts and all sorts of feelings. Not often pleasant, but usually unpleasant and usually uncomfortable in some way or other. Conjures up the stories we've been told about it, the cultural beliefs, what we're taught in our culture, or if we grew up in a particular religious faith or tradition. Every major, for lack of a better term, religious tradition has something to accept this question. And we will take it up now together, together as a community, the supportive company of one another. Take up this question. And you may wonder, is there a value to contemplating death, either our own or those who we love? Isn't it kind of morbid? Is it pessimistic to think about this? Life is, difficult enough. Why should I think about this? And those are questions that commonly come up, and I want to sort of address some of those tonight. Why is it that we would take this up, and why would we contemplate this, and why would we make this a part of our practice, and how can what we already know in terms of our meditation, how can that help us in this? And I would say that it's wise and helpful to contemplate death for many different reasons. And the first is that it's inevitable. It's inevitable. It's one of the largest questions that human beings face. And we take it up so that we can begin to understand it and have a sense of what it means more clearly. To consider what it is and consider what it isn't. We'll go into more depth about that. It gives us an opportunity to examine our fears around it, because for maybe even most people, it's their greatest fear. And this will give us an opportunity to sort of dig through that, what our fears are, our confusion about it, our fixed ideas, our inherited views. We were talking about inherited views, and we were talking about acceptance, and how acceptance is a process of becoming open and taking a larger view. And contemplating death can help us do that. Understanding brings the wisdom of acceptance. So by turning directly into this question, facing it directly, we can develop wisdom and acceptance. And it's through wisdom and through understanding that compassion arises. When we understand, when we can accept, compassion spontaneously arises from that openness. So we can learn to be compassionate with ourselves around these questions, and we can learn to be compassionate for others and with others when they're facing these issues and circumstances. When we know, or I think we know from our meditation perhaps, that when we avoid things they often become even more painful because they don't go away. They don't go away. And pushing things away, avoiding them, is not helpful in the end, by any means. So we turn towards this and we look at it straight on and try and understand it. So that we don't create even more suffering for ourselves. Contemplating death also gives meaning and perspective to life that we live, our day-to-day life. It helps us to maintain that larger view, that larger perspective. And it helps us to stay focused on what is important. There's that popular expression, don't sweat the small stuff. It's all small stuff. And when we can keep this larger view about our mortality, knowing that our life will come to an end, the unimportant stuff kind of falls away. It's helpful in that way. It helps us to not take ourselves, to not take life so seriously and so personally, because death is anything but personal. It's completely impersonal, really. And the other side of that is that it helps us to appreciate our life and not take it for granted, which is also very helpful. Understanding this deeper nature of life and the deeper nature of death helps us to dispel our fear. And when we're fearful, it doesn't allow us to see and to understand clearly. It's an obstacle to deeper understanding, and it's an obstacle to wisdom. So we need to face our fear and look at it and analyze it and turn it this way and turn it that way and learn about it. Not turn away from it, turn towards it. And when we do that, it loses its power over us. When it loses its power, then we can have clarity about these things, about these questions. When we don't understand clearly, we suffer. Really. It's that simple. Because our mind will create stories. If we don't create and allow and accept and make this spaciousness, then our mind will fill it with stories, often that are unhelpful. So our meditation practice and contemplating this, it helps us change how we relate to our own mortality and to those around us and the people we care for. It helps us to appreciate life just as it is. It helps us be grateful for what we have, why we have it. And that is a very grounded place to be. And we can be in that state of openness and acceptance, and we can truly be present. And through this practice and through this meditation and realization and contemplation, we can come to more deeply understand and relate more deeply to the Dharma and to these teachings. In particular, the teachings of the Four Noble Truths and the three characteristics of existence. And we'll talk more deeply about those, what those are, and how we can relate to them. Deep, deep wisdom, very, very basic to Buddhism. If you were in our practice period last year, we took these up in some detail, and we'll take them up again, because they're so really very important, and so helpful as wisdom is. Wisdom is helpful, and wisdom itself is liberating. And understanding these deep wisdom about this existence is incredibly helpful. Incredibly helpful. So we'll look at those. And it's important to take up these questions so that when our death comes, we can be peaceful and serene and not be fearful. We can be present for it. And that's so much easier than trying to run away from something that we can't run away from. And we can also help others to be peaceful and serene when they're facing this. Other people, other beings, pets, all beings. Is really to be present when someone or some other being is leaving this life is really, it's hard to put into words. And I can tell you from my own experience that it's meaningful for everyone involved. So we can learn to be calm, we can be peaceful, we can be accepting, we can be tremendous help to others, tremendous help for ourselves. Maybe the greatest form of compassion and expression. So, so in the coming weeks, we'll talk about these issues. It will become, I think, clear why being peaceful and at ease, as the expression goes, is so important when we're coming to the end of what we call in our everyday language the end of our life, or what we call dying. And in Buddhism, there's more to it. And we'll learn a little bit about that as well. So, as I said, we can use these meditation practices that we already know and we're already familiar with. And we will learn some new ones as well, introduce some new practices that we can use. And I'm going to try and bring in wisdom from the Zen tradition, from a Zen perspective, a Zen perspective, I should say. I don't know that there is the Zen perspective. And I'm also going to bring in wisdom from the literature of the Vajrayana, the Tibetan tradition, and they have a great deal to say on this topic. And so I look forward to the next few weeks, or however long we spend looking at this. Look forward to delving deeply into this with you. And I recognize that it can be difficult, and I am grateful for your willingness to do this, and I appreciate it very much. And I think that really doing this as a group, looking at these things as a group rather than contemplating them on our own, is really very beneficial, really helpful, and really supportive, so we can support one another through this process, because it's difficult for so many of us. And as I often say, it takes courage, and I applaud and bow to your courage for being here and being part of this process. And it hopefully, from what I've said tonight, hopefully you can see that it has a lot of different benefits. So it's not all doom and gloom and uncomfortable and painful. Because there's great wisdom to be had. And this is a wonderful opportunity. It's an incredible doorway, stepping through to look at these. And there are lots of very interesting paths that lead off from this main path. So, so I am, I don't know that excited is the right word, but there is an excitement, as this is so helpful, so practical, and so helpful. It has so much potential for our practice and for our everyday lives, moving through our lives, having this large perspective, and not being so bothered by little things that maybe used to bother us. It's so helpful to take this larger perspective. So I look forward to this process with you all. And I guess I'm really curious if you have any questions or comments at the outset.
Well, oh, sorry, I have my earphones on. I can't really hear myself, so I'm probably loud. Let me unplug here. Well, I might be weird, but I'm really excited about this because this is something I've been looking into. And so I think it's wonderful that we're gonna spend some time with this, and I'm really curious about what it's gonna be like. I mean, I've been exploring the end of life issues for just a little bit as becoming an end of life doula. And that's only because I was a birth doula, and I thought, why don't they have end of life doulas? And now they do. And I have people in my life that are nearing the end of life, and I've had neighbors die, and it's caused me to take a look at death and my fear around it. And so I'm very, very much looking forward to ways that meditation can help me accept death, my own. I've thought about my own some, my ideal death. And, you know, that may happen, it may not. And to be with others, just in a couple of instances when I've been with dying friends and neighbors, it's like you said, Jeff, it's just an amazing journey. It's really an honor. And just to be, I mean, what it's made me realize is that, you know, you pretty much die the way you live. And at least from what I've seen, if it's not an accidental death or a tragic death, that is. But and you know, just knowing what little I do know about Buddhism and impermanence and presence and those gaps you've spoken about in our meditations. To me, the whole process of dying and being with someone is like just a really nice long gap of openness and spaciousness. So yeah, I'm really excited that you're doing this. So glad I get to hang in here with you guys.
Thank you. Glad that you're joining us. It's fantastic.
Just one more thing. I mean, it's really hard to find a group of people who are willing to talk about this or learn about this. So that's another reason I'm like, yes, there's a space here. You guys are going to hold a space to have these conversations, or not so much conversations, but just sitting with it and everything that it brings in. And I think I mean, what better group than you all who are already pretty aware to explore this.
It is rare. It's not talked about a lot. Certainly in our culture, it's not talked about much at all. And we'll look a little bit, you know, as we're trying to move deeper through sort of the received cultural meanings of, you know, what is death in the United States and even in the West, compared to sort of how it's considered in not using generalities, but in the East. Very different approaches. And it is a very rare opportunity to talk about it and sit with it in a group like this. So It's, as Coleman would say about sitting, it's a rare and precious opportunity. So that's another reason why I'm sort of excited, with a little trepidation about this. So. Anyone else have any comments or questions or anything in particular that you're curious about or would like us to pick up, cover?
I'm very curious too. I was looking forward to today's conversation. I don't know why. I'm curious. One thing I'm curious about is whether Zen approaches this without having to worry about the afterlife type of thing. Like many religions is like, oh, you know, there is an afterlife. But what if we're a little bit skeptical about that? Is there a way to face death without having to worry about whether or not there is an afterlife and that type of thing? I'm curious about how Zen approaches this issue.
So it's a perennial question. I imagine that as a species, this question has been there from the beginning. So, what is this? What is death? What does it mean? How do we relate to it? We know, we certainly know, at least intellectually, about it, but below that, what is it? And what does it mean? Because that will determine how we understand it, and how we think about it will determine how we relate to it. So it's so important to try and look at this and develop some clarity about it. That's kind of why part of why I think picking this up is so helpful, and the other reasons that I mentioned tonight. And, I think we'll just kind of go down the list, as it were, spend a little time with each of these questions or each of these aspects of what I brought up tonight. And we can share together our experiences and stories, and questions and fears and trepidations and all of it. So there's no right and no wrong. And tears, and share our tears. I was reading today that the United States have passed 131,000 people have died from the coronavirus at this point. 31,500 people have died in the last several months from this. It's a lot of death. A lot of death. And it's brought up issues of people dying in the hospital, almost alone, in many cases alone. And Kim brought up, having ideas about our ideal death, which may or may not happen. But if we have some understanding, and if we have some clarity and some peace of mind, then whatever comes will be ready to go through it. We'll be able to be present for whatever it is, which is true of what we do with our meditation practice. This is why we practice, to be present to whatever it is.
That just kind of got me thinking, because I'm thinking, okay, of course, what am I going to be doing while I'm meditating about death? But it makes me think that, like a lot of times when you're sitting with someone you're just sitting with them if they're not well, whether they're dying or not, and you're just there, you're just present for them, kind of like, in meditations, you're not doing anything, you're just holding that space. So I guess I was just kind of thinking in my head, a meditation on this might be kind of like holding space for myself, as if I were dying, if I were in the dying process. I don't know if that'll happen or not, but just kind of something that made me think about when you said that.
Mm-hmm. There are a number of traditional practices around this, and I'll talk about some of them. There's some that go way back from the time of the Buddha's recommendations, which is he would have monks go sit in the charnel grounds where they burned bodies, and they would have to stay there at night and meditate on death and impermanence. And that's one practice. Tibetans have a whole host of other practices, visualization practices, and bardo practices, and we'll talk about what that is. The bardos are. It's one deep way of understanding. So we'll get to that. All right then. Well, thank you all for being here and being present and meditation practice, bringing your open hearts and minds to this practice and to this contemplation, this new path that we're going to be walking down together. So I look forward to what unfolds through this process. And well, thank you all. Look forward to being with you next week.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Kim. Have a good night.
Good night. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Javier.
You done?